WHDH and WHDH-FM bring you another in the series of Harvard Law School forums. The subject this evening is Priorities for Survival. The guest speaker is one of America's outstanding labor leaders, Walter Reuther. And now, by transcription, we take you to Sanders Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Mr. Walter Reuther.
Thank you, Professor Dawson. Ladies and gentlemen, first I should like to express my sincere appreciation for the opportunity of visiting with you. As Professor Dawson has suggested, the subject matter that I have been asked to address myself to is priorities for survival. And I want to say that I've been somewhat sensitive about the subject matters that I have been asked to speak about because of an experience that I had some years back at a time when I had been asked to give the third and final lecture of a series of lectures of 3 that were sponsored by the University of California at the Berkeley campus. Mr. William Green, who was then the president of the AFL, and Morris Tobin, the former governor of Massachusetts, who was then the Secretary of Labor, delivered the first 2 lectures, and I delivered the final one. And I was not very enthusiastic about the subject matter. The title was The Economics of Collective Bargaining, and I found this most uninspiring. And I was picked up at the hotel to be driven over to the campus by Dr. Clark Kerr, who is now the president of the university in California, and I asked how many students normally come out to hear such a lecture. He said, well, we've been getting around 250 to 300. And I said, well, that's not too bad. But he said, we're expecting a much larger meeting tonight, and we've moved the meeting from the lecture hall into the gymnasium. And I said, how many people does the gymnasium hold? And he said, 8,500. And I said, why don't you just tell them that I took ill and let's go back to the hotel? And to our surprise, the place was packed. And I made my speech, and the president of the university, who introduced me, advised me that this was the largest non-athletic gathering in the history of the university. And I felt quite good about this, and I went back to Detroit, and a year later I received a little note from the president of the university, and he said, dear Mr. Reuther, in all good conscience, I must tell you that your record was equaled. Dr. Kinsey was here last week, and his subject matter was the sex behavior pattern of the male species, whereupon I sent a telegram protesting this as unfair competition. Now, I would like this afternoon to not really make a speech, but to think out loud with you about some of the complex and challenging problems that we face as a free people. These are problems which transcend partisan politics. These are problems that transcend the divisions between management and labor. These matters relate to the survival of the human family. I had the privilege on May the 1st of last year to be asked by Mayor Willy Brandt of West Berlin to come there and to speak the sentiments of the free world. And I spoke to more than 600,000 Berliners who had come together to demonstrate their common dedication and their common determination to defend their common freedom. I was deeply impressed by this because the meeting took place in the shadow of the old Reichstag building, which I had seen the first time in February of 1933, the day that the Nazis burned that for propaganda purposes. I left Berlin to go into the industrial Ruhr for meetings in Düsseldorf. And there you see what has been taking place in Germany. No country has made the kind of economic comeback. New factories, new industries everywhere you look. And I thought about Germany. Germany has great economic power, but she lacks the essential democratic heritage to give that economic power a sense of historic direction. I left Düsseldorf and went to London, where I met with my friends in the British House of Commons. Here is a great building which is the symbol of the cradle of Western democracy. England has 1,000 years of rich democratic heritage, but she lacks the economic muscle. She lacks economic resources. We are the only country in the world that has that rare combination of tremendous economic resources, of a great productive potential, of a highly developed technology, plus a rich democratic heritage to give meaning and purpose and a sense of moral direction to the utilization of these great economic and material resources. And it is for this reason, not because we are a chosen people, but history, because of these reasons, has thrust upon us increasing world responsibilities, and we have, in fact, become the custodians of world freedom. If little Luxembourg does badly, the cause of world freedom is not in jeopardy. But if we do badly, then the cause of human freedom is in trouble in the whole world. And I want to talk about some of those problems. I believe that one of the sources of our difficulty is the fact that we have made unprecedented progress in the physical sciences, in the art of working with machines and material. But we have failed to make comparable progress in the human and social sciences, in the art of working and living with man. And this imbalance between unprecedented progress in the physical sciences and a lack of comparable progress in the human and social sciences is the source of man's basic dilemma. This imbalance creates the world in which we live, a world in which the physical sciences have created nuclear giants who we are fearful may behave like moral pygmies. The physical progress has put the guided missile within the reach of the misguided man. And what we do in America about this problem will have more to do with the shape of tomorrow than what any other people in the world do. I have just come back from a World Congress of the Free Trade Unions of the world, 57 million strong. And we are about the practical day-to-day struggle of giving meaning and purpose to broad human values. These are the people who are working in Asia and Africa, trying to build the beginning of a democratic society. They are in the frontline trenches in the struggle against tyranny and in the struggle against social injustice. And I share the point of view that the free world labor movement is among freedom's most effective forces because we have understood that the struggle to make peace and freedom secure in our world is inseparably bound together with the struggle for economic and social justice. You can't make peace, nor can you make freedom secure in a vacuum. They must be made secure in a world in trouble. Look at Korea. Look at South Africa. Martial law in Turkey. Riots in South America. This is the world, seething with revolt, in which compelling human problems cry for solution. Your freedom and my freedom must be made secure in that world, because freedom, like peace, is an indivisible value. You can make it secure for yourself only as you work to make it universal in the world. This is what we're dealing with. Now, the communists are perfecting the techniques by which they forge poverty into power. Half of the people of the world have an income of less than $100 per year. I saw this kind of ugly, naked poverty in India. I saw it in Africa. And this poverty creates the ideal climate in which the forces of communism can exploit the forces of human desperation. And what we need to understand is that the struggle between the forces of freedom and tyranny is essentially a struggle for the hearts and the minds of the uncommitted peoples of the world. And they are the great majority of the human family. And whichever side wins their loyalty, that side will win the contest. And they are looking at America. And they are judging us in this contest of ideas. And they are not going to judge America by our material wealth, or by the brightness of the polish on the new Cadillacs, or by the number of gadgets we turn out. They are measuring us by the only true standards of the greatness of any civilization. What are the standards of greatness? Is it how rich a nation is in material wealth? That is not the standard of greatness. It isn't whether your plumbing is up to date or inadequate. The real standard is, what is the measure of social and moral responsibility by which a people commit their material resources to human fulfillment, by which they demonstrate in a practical way the measure of responsibility of translating technical progress into human progress, in the human happiness and human dignity. And I say to you, in this struggle for the hearts and minds of people of the world, we are doing badly. I'm for the parades. I'm for the goodwill tours. But they are not enough. And unless they are followed by comprehensive, long-range problems that deal with these compelling human needs, the parades will do harm and not good. Because when the little American paper flag waved by an Indian child along the parade routes in New Delhi, when that little flag lies soiled and trampled in the gutter, when the parade is over, the ugly, compelling problems still cry for solution. And what we do about those problems will shape the image of tomorrow. Now, why are we doing badly? It is not because our system of human freedom is unequal to the challenge. We are losing because we are not trying. We are not trying because, as a people, we have not comprehended the dimensions of the challenge. We have not understood that the struggle in the world is not for supremacy. No one can have supremacy. In the age of nuclear warfare, the AFL-CIO had a 2-day conference on world affairs in New York last Monday and Tuesday. General Medeiros, who resigned recently as the top military man in the missile field, spoke to this conference. And he said to this conference last Tuesday that America now has in its nuclear stockpile a destructive capability to destroy every living thing in the world. And then he said, now to get the generality down to an understandable dimension, we have a nuclear destructive capability in being equivalent to 10 tons of TNT for every man, every woman, and every child in the world. So that no one can be supreme in that kind of a struggle. The struggle is not for supremacy. The struggle is for the survival of the human race. And what America needs desperately, I believe, not as a labor leader, I say this as a human being, we need a greater sense of national urgency. We need a greater sense of national unity. And we need a greater sense of national purpose. I have been suggesting that we work out a list of national priorities related to survival, in which we put first things first, and that we brush aside the corrupting influences of national complacency which seems to paralyze the national will to action. Because nothing less than a total effort to win the peace will be adequate. You know, it's a strange thing. Pearl Harbor comes along, and in the dark days that followed, we were shocked into urgency. And everybody understood that we could not meet the challenge of war with halfway and half-hearted measures, with policies of too little and too late. Nor can we meet the challenge of peace with those kind of policies and measures, because the challenge of peace is infinitely more complex than was the challenge of war. And so we've got to make up our minds that if America must provide that measure of leadership and commit that dimension of our resources to win the peace, that we've got to brush aside business as usual, labor as usual, government as usual, education as usual, life as usual, and take on the total responsibilities of a total effort. And I'd like to talk about some of the items that I put on this agenda of priorities for survival. First is the question of education. Education is the key to unlocking the capabilities and the potential of each generation. We are the richest country in the world in material resources, and yet we are doing a miserably inadequate job. And unless we begin to take affirmative, adequate, bold steps to overcome the tragic deficit on the educational front, we are in trouble, and the free world is in trouble. I sat down for 5 hours with Mr. Khrushchev, and I did my best to try to interpret to him what America stood for, why we were dedicated to the values of human freedom. He felt very smug and confident that his system would bury our system. And he says, look what you're doing in education and look what we're doing. We don't want to duplicate their system. We want to do this job within our framework of freedom. How do you think the Russians got ahead in rocketry and put the first satellite in orbit around the sun and photographed the backside of the moon? Not by reading communist propaganda, but by a tremendous, massive educational effort in great depth. The key to rocketry is metallurgy. How much heat can your metal take before it disintegrates? The greater the heat, the greater the thrust, the longer the range, and the greater the payload. The Russians got there first with more because last year they turned out 6 metallurgists in their universities for every one that we turned out. We ought to have utter contempt for their system of values, but let us not have contempt for their competence. Now, our educational challenge is much more difficult to meet than is the educational challenge in a totalitarian society, because the men in the Kremlin, they make the great social decisions, and therefore they can concentrate almost exclusively about an educational effort in the physical sciences. But we have to make a comparable effort in the human and social sciences, because it's what we do in the human and social sciences that gives meaning and purpose and direction to what we do in the physical sciences. In short, we have this very practical job of finding a way within the framework of our free society of matching our scientific, our technical, and our production know-how with comparable human and social and moral know-why. And that's why defending freedom is a difficult task, but we can do it if we work at it. My second priority is a non-material, non-tangible value. It deals with a matter which determines the condition of our credentials in the world, in the contest for the hearts and minds of the uncommitted peoples. And this deals with what I think to be a very compelling problem. American democracy must bridge the moral gap between its noble promises and its ugly practices in the field of civil rights. And I want to say that it's one of the most refreshing and encouraging developments in America to see the way the students in the North are supporting the students in the South for their struggle for the right to be free. You go to India or Africa, and you be asked, as I have been asked, to explain the gaps between the principles that we profess to embrace and the ugly practices that we live. You try to tell a student in New Delhi, or a peasant in the northern hills, or a textile worker in Bombay, or a dock worker in Kenya. You explain Little Rock, or you explain why 11 students in South Carolina were arrested and put in jail because they sat in the wrong chairs in a public library. There are no excuses that are acceptable. And the only way American democracy can have the symbol which it needs to win this contest for the hearts and minds is for American democracy to square its practice with its preachings in the field of civil rights. Otherwise, we shall be unable and we shall be unworthy of leading the forces of freedom. Now we need, and I make as my third priority, adequate military power. This is dictated by the necessities of the world situation. But we should not make the tragic mistake of not understanding that military power is but the negative aspects of a dynamic foreign policy. It buys you time. It wins you the opportunity. And what you do in a positive way with the time and the opportunity in terms of waging the contest for the hearts of men on the economic and social fronts, then if you don't take advantage of the time, then the opportunity is wasted. And I think that we need, and I make as my fourth priority, to raise our sights and to carry forward through the United Nations a long-range, adequate economic assistance program to help the underdeveloped countries of the world to develop their resources, to carry on the massive positive fight against poverty and hunger and ignorance and disease in the world. Mr. Khrushchev is stepping up his program. More and more of the resources of the Soviet economy will go into programs of economic penetration, followed by political subversion. And we ought to be there first, not because the communists are going to get them, but because people need positive help. I happen to believe that the struggle for freedom in Asia is going to be won in the rice fields, not the battlefields. This is why I have been suggesting now for 10 years the creation of a comprehensive federal scholarship program, and to say to thousands of young Americans, here is an opportunity to get an education on a competitive scholastic basis. You win a scholarship. You choose your field that you want to major in. You choose the university. But when you have graduated and you are competent in that field, you enlist in an international Peace Corps and you serve abroad in lieu of and for the same period that otherwise you would be obligated to serve in the military forces of our country. And I happen to believe that the more young Americans that we send to the distant places of the world to fight poverty and hunger and ignorance, working with slide rule and textbook and medical kit, building with the tools of peace, the greater will be the possibilities that we won't have to send these same young Americans to these countries fighting with the weapons of war. These are the choices in the struggle for human survival. Now, when you talk about these kind of priorities, about education, adequate military power, stepped-up economic aid programs, housing, medical care,
all the other things that we need to do in America, there are always the voices of the men of little faith. We have had them all through the history of our great country, that when we needed to respond to a call to greatness, they whispered on the side, and they made doubts and they raised questions, and they always sold America short. And they are wrong now. They say these things are all fine, but we can't afford to do them. They have not understood that the American economy is freedom's greatest material asset. And if we mobilize the productive potential of the American economy, it is equal to meeting our needs at home for education and housing and slum clearance and medical care and resource development and all the other things we need to do to meet the needs of America, and at the same time to carry out our increasing responsibilities in the world. And my fifth priority is the compelling necessity for achieving and maintaining full employment and full production in peacetime. You know, when we had the war situation, I worked in Washington on many government commissions, the Manpower Commission, the War Production Board. Detroit was the great arsenal of democracy. We turned out more war material there than any other industrial city in the world. We had full employment and full production. Every able-bodied man and woman was working 6 and 7 days a week, all the overtime that they could take. We got the grandfathers and the grandmothers out of retirement, and they went back into the war plant. And back in those days, quite different than it is now. If you get a job in General Motors, and they aren't hiring many people because we've got very serious layoffs in the automotive industry, but if you get a job in a GM plant now, they have a doctor there. And he gives you a physical exam as though you were going to lead the Marine Corps. In those days of the war production, you walked in and you asked for a job. He took your name and your address, and the personnel director felt your wrist, and if you were still warm, they put you on the payroll, no questions asked. And our people are asking a simple question. This isn't complicated. You don't have to have a PhD degree in higher economics from the Ivy League to understand it. It's a simple question. If we can have full employment and full production making the weapons of war and destruction, pray tell us, these workers ask, why can't we have full employment and full production making the good things of life for people in peacetime? We've got the technology, we've got the resources. All we have to do is to demonstrate the will and the leadership to commit these resources. The great tragedy is that at a time when the Soviet economy is being driven, last in 58, our industrial production went down 11%. Theirs went up 11%. There's talk about that during the 1960s, in 10 years, we will have 3 recessions in that period. This is what the Wall Street economists, the ultra-conservative economists are telling us. Right now, more than 5% of the total workforce of America is unemployed. 18% of our industrial capacity stands idle. And in 1958, we lost 47 million tons of steel because of unemployment and idle steel capacity. 47 million tons of steel is 3 times as much steel that all of the underdeveloped countries in the world used in 1959. The problem is that somehow we have not learned to manage economic abundance. And I'm going to talk about this in great detail tonight with the other group that I'm going to be meeting with. We know how to create abundance with automation, with the new tools that science and technology gives us. But we have not learned how to manage that abundance. by sharing it between workers and stockholders and consumers so that we can achieve dynamic growth and expansion. And the result is, because we haven't learned to manage abundance, we have recession, economic stagnation, unemployment, and idle capacity. Growth rather than 2.3, we would have had more than $260 billion increase in our gross national product. Every American family, from the fanciest family in the most luxurious penthouse in Park Avenue to the most impoverished sharecropper on the mud flats of the lower Mississippi, could have had $6,000 more income. The federal government could have had $60 billion more revenue. But we threw that away because of unemployment and idle capacity. And this $260 billion is not only the margin of economic progress in terms of education and housing and medical care. I believe it happens to be the margin of survival. And we've got this practical job in America. How can we find a way so that within the framework of our system of freedom, political freedom, our free economic system, we can develop the social and political mechanisms essential to keep our economy moving forward, higher levels of economic production, sharing that greater production, so that we achieve a dynamic balance between greater productive power balanced by greater purchasing power. Each time this dynamic balance is achieved on a higher and higher economic plateau so that we can move forward. Now, this is the key to where we're going. And let us not pretend that slogans about the virtues of democracy will fill the vacuums created by our failure to meet these kind of challenging problems. The H-bomb will not save us, or the ballistic missile, unless we can demonstrate that our system of freedom can be made to work more responsibly and to be more responsive to the basic needs of the total community. You should see what's going on in the automated factories of America. I went to work in Ford's in 1927 in the spring of that year. They were making the last Model T, and I was employed as a skilled mechanic to help tool up for the first Model A. The Model T was a simple little piece of mechanism, but it took thousands and thousands of workers on individual machines more than 3 weeks to machine that simple engine from the rough casting to the finished engine block. The Ford Motor Company built the first fully automated engine plant in 1951, adjacent to the Cleveland City Airport. I went through that plant for the first time back in that period. A V8 engine, complicated piece of mechanism. Rough casting comes from the foundry, is fed into an automated machine line without a worker's hand touching it. How long do you think it is before it comes out the other end fully machined? 14 6/10 minutes. Is this good or is this bad? The tools and the problem were created in the physical science. The answers must be found in the human and social sciences. If this power to create unprecedented economic abundance is geared to narrow, selfish, immoral ends, then it will create serious problems of dislocation and social problems that will undermine the very structure and foundation of our free society. Yet if we can find a way within the framework of freedom to gear these tools of abundance to the needs and the hopes and the aspirations of the total people, then they can build that better tomorrow that the philosophers and the poets have been talking about these many centuries. Now, this is where we are. and freedom shall prevail. By freedom demonstrating that the human and social sciences can give direction and moral purpose to the genius of those who work in the physical sciences. When I went through this plant, the management said to me, "Mr. Reuther, what's your impression? How do you like this?" And I said, "I'm greatly impressed by this automated factory. Worker sits there, watches electric panel, red, green, and yellow lights. When all the green lights are working, it means the 100 tools under his control are all working to standard. Then an amber light comes on, tool 72. The worker knows that that tool is still operating, but it's becoming fatigued. So he goes over to station 72. He stands there with a replacement tool in his hand. When the red light goes on, the machine stops. He pulls out the old tool, puts in the new tool, the green light goes on it goes. Bores the cylinder. An electric eye measures the cylinder. If it's not the size, it sends electric impulse to the brain of the machine. The tool is adjusted, another cut is taken, measured again, on it goes. Now, you can't make customers by automation. This is our problem. And I said to this management, he said to me, "Well, aren't you worried about how you're going to collect union dues from all these machines?" I said, "No, what's bothering me is how you're going to sell Ford cars to these machines. That's our basic problem. How do we maintain a balance between productive power?" And this is going to increase at an accelerated rate. We will make more technological progress in the next 10 years than we made in the past 25 years. And 5 years beyond that, we will make more progress in 5 years than we will have made in the last 50 years. That's the nature of this problem. And therefore, we need a tremendous effort in the human and social sciences to stay parallel with the progress that we make in the economic and the material sciences. And this is why I think that collective bargaining is important. And I'm going to spend a great deal of time talking about collective bargaining as a social process in a free society. Collective bargaining is not a private argument between labor and management, although there are many business people who would like to keep it that way and many labor leaders who would like to keep it that way. And they're both wrong. Collective bargaining must be the people's business, because collective bargaining is an essential part of the total effort of a free people to find answers to these very challenging problems. And I have been suggesting that we need to find a way to raise collective bargaining above the level of a struggle between competing economic pressure groups. Now, I sit at the bargaining table, and I have the responsibility, in terms of our whole union, of representing the interest of 1.5 million workers, and behind them many, many families. I sit at the bargaining table with the General Motors Corporation, the biggest corporation in the world. And obviously I'm there to represent the interest of the members that I am legally designated to represent. They pay my salary. Now, the corporation executives who are there to represent the corporation have a responsibility to the stockholders. And while we each have our separate responsibilities, we must always act in the knowledge that labor and management in a free society, while having their separate responsibilities, have a joint responsibility to the whole of our society, and that joint responsibility of necessity transcends in importance our separate responsibilities. But one of the problems that we have in America, and I make this as my next priority, is that we cannot solve new problems excepting as we find new ideas and new concepts. You can't solve the problems of tomorrow with yesterday's tools. And if we are going to constantly be probing and searching for new ideas and new concepts with which to meet new problems and new challenges, then we've got to somehow revitalize the free marketplace of ideas in America. It's in a sad state of repair. Joe McCarthy is gone, but the erosion in the free marketplace of ideas has extracted a tragic price in America. The contest of free ideas in the free marketplace is the yeast that keeps a democratic society in ferment. It's the contest of ideas that enables a free society to maintain the vitality it needs to be equal to a changing world. But you know, the sad thing about America is that you say to some fellow, why don't you speak out on this idea? And he says, well, I don't want to complicate my life. It's safer to be quiet. You know, the mortgage on human freedom is never fully paid. Every generation must make its down payment on the unpaid balance on the mortgage of human freedom. And the test of whether you believe in freedom and whether you believe in keeping alive a free marketplace of ideas is whether you have the courage to say aloud, what the inner man whispers in the ear of your conscience. Courage is not where do you stand when it's comfortable and convenient, and when the sun is shining and the breezes are balmy. Anybody can believe in anything under those circumstances. The test of courage. And freedom is not possible without courage. Is where do you stand in the hour of challenge and controversy, when the winds and the storm is raging and you are lonely? And unless America can get a renewal of that kind of total commitment to the values of freedom in the free marketplace of ideas, then we will lack the inner strength and the sense of deep purpose that must provide the essential spiritual motivation for any society to make it worthy of the blessings of freedom. This is what we didn't make Mr. Khrushchev understand when he came to America. We showed him our skyscrapers in Manhattan. We showed him the beauties of San Francisco. We showed him the production of our prairies and our mills and our factories. But we didn't give him a feeling that behind this great wealth there was a deep inner total commitment. And that cannot be excepting as we keep alive and vital the free marketplace of ideas. Then we got this problem of corruption. I am saddened by the headlines about corrupt labor leaders, although they're only a handful, but the headlines only talk about the corrupt ones. There is just as much corruption in business and in our total culture, because the corruption in the labor movement is a reflection of a broader cultural problem. Let us not pretend that a free society can meet the complex challenges that we are confronted with. The most challenging problem that freedom has ever faced, the most powerful adversary, and we are playing for keeps in the struggle between freedom and tyranny. You spend 5 hours with Mr. Khrushchev and you'll come away knowing that we're not playing games. Mr. Khrushchev believes that our society is incapable of achieving the sense of high purpose that can rise, that can lift us up above the little things that divide us. You see, the communists get unity by conformity. Everybody salutes and clicks their heels to the party line. We have to get unity in diversity. That's more difficult. And the communists say that a free society like ours is made up of competing and conflicting economic pressure groups who are incapable of arriving at a basic common denominator. And therefore, while we wage war within our society, they can take advantage of that basic lack of unity. And one of the problems that we have as a free people is the problem that grows out of this tragic notion that all we need is the motivation of a materialistic philosophy which overemphasizes the acquisition of material wealth as a measurement of success. I know some of the most poverty-stricken millionaires in America. Men who have no comprehension or inner experience about the truly deeper meanings of human civilization. Their whole lives are in company of individual initiative and incentive, are powerful, constructive, motivating forces. No one wants to destroy that. But no one in their right mind can believe that a society in the age of the atom, in the age of outer space, that kind of society can solve the complex problems and meet the infinitely difficult challenges by the blind economic motivation of the marketplace. Only a fool can really believe that. And yet somehow we have not found a way in America to shift greater emphasis upon non-material values in terms of the measurement of success. And this is what corrupts. Take a young fellow like Charles Van Doren. I felt deeply saddened that a man with an intellect who came out of a fine American family with high standards of ethical responsibility, that this corruption is so deep and so corroding of our moral values that even he was enticed into the snares. And payola and rigged TV all become a part of the pattern, like labor corruption, of a philosophy that says not how, but how much. That kind of society will not be equal to the communist challenge. Because if the contest in the world is a contest framed essentially in terms of material values, the Russians will win hands down. Because their system is built around material values. Material values are the end product of their civilization. And material values are only the means to the end in our system of value. The end is the human being. And material values have worth only as we relate them to human values, only as we make them instruments to facilitate the growth and the development of that little spark of human personality which every human being has deep within him, so that the inner man can grow and live true to himself in the life of the outer man. I'm going to Africa again in June to do some work there. And I'm deeply troubled by the problems in South Africa, as I think most people are in the world. And I was talking to a UAW meeting last night in Hartford, And I was talking about values. And I was reminded of a British movie that I saw, written by a friend of mine who wrote that wonderful book, Cry, Beloved Country. And there's a scene in that British movie where it shows an employment agent working for the gold mining industry in Johannesburg in South Africa who's going out into the villages to recruit workers to be employed in the gold mines. And the scene is on a narrow gauge railroad where the workers are coming in and they approach the outer regions of Johannesburg and they come upon the huge mountains of earth and the big mine shafts with their towering steel and the metal bucket going down deep into the earth. And these workers from the primitive villages had never seen anything like this. And so they asked the employment agent in amazement, "What are these things?" He said, "You see that metal bucket going down in that big shaft? Well, you'll be put into that metal bucket. And we will lower you thousands of feet deep into the earth. And then you will dig the earth and load up the metal bucket. And we'll bring it up. And we take gold out of the earth. And the earth that we don't use, we make these big mountains of." And they said, "What is gold?" And he tried to explain. They said, "Well, can you eat it?" He said, "No, you can't eat it." They said, "Do you wear it?" He said, "No, you don't wear it." So they said, "Well, if you don't eat it, you don't wear it, why do you go to all this effort to get it? What do you do with it?" Well, he says, "We smell it, and we make it into gold bullion." And they said, "Well, what do you do with these gold bullion?" He said, "We take it to Johannesburg, and we put it on a big ship." And they said, "Where do you send it?" They said, "We send it to America." And they said, "What do they do with it?" Well, he said, they take it to a place called Fort Knox. The Americans dig another big hole and put it back in the ground. Here's gold, which is the symbol of material wealth, and yet it has no value, excepting as you can equate it with human values. Now, America must answer this call to greatness, but we can't do it unless somehow we arouse ourselves, unless somehow we get our values in sharper focus so that we know the importance between what is important and what is not important. So we put first things first. We better work at selling our ideas and our ideals in the world. I spoke in Tunis 2 years ago to a huge mass meeting in the public square. It was in August, very hot and sticky. When the meeting was over, the young Tunisian who was the secretary of the new labor movement that we are building in Tunis said to me, "Brother Reuther," he said, "how would you like a cold drink?" This was precisely what I needed. We went right around the main square on the corner in Tunisia, and there was the Coca-Cola vending machine. You put in your Tunisian nickel, and you get out your ice-cold bottle of Coca-Cola. And on all the billboards all over North Africa, like you will find in Asia, signs advertising our Cokes and our cars and our cosmetics. We had better understand that the contest in the world is not about selling gadgets or cars or Cokes or cosmetics. And we had better learn to sell our ideas and our idealism, because this is the area in which the contest is being waged. And I want to conclude with one thought. I am somewhat disturbed sometimes by the frequency that I hear a kind of a cynical attitude expressed which says, well, you can't get people excited about positive things. That the world has only reacted in terms of negative things. That man is capable of his highest achievements only in terms of negative reflexes. When he's frightened in war, or when he is moved by fear. I don't accept that. I think we're better than that. I think that deep within the human breast there is a great spiritual reservoir that affirmative leadership with vision and courage can arouse. And we can get people working and building and sacrificing for the things they believe in. because they share common hopes, because they dream common dreams, and because they have a common faith. This is the great challenge. I have unlimited faith in the capacity of free men to meet the challenge of tyranny. I have unlimited faith in America and in our free institutions. I think that we can do this job if we roll up our sleeves and go to work. And if we do, we can inspire men of goodwill all over the world. And together we can go forward with our banners high. And together we can build a world, a new world. And we can fashion that new world in the image of peace, in the image of freedom, in the image of social justice, and in the image of human brotherhood. Thank you.
You have heard another in the series of Harvard Law School forums. The topic tonight was Priorities for Survival, and the guest speaker, Walter Reuther, who has long been recognized as the outstanding champion of labor in the automotive industry. Be sure to listen next Sunday at 10 p.m. when Harry Golden, renowned editor of the Carolina Israelite and author of bestsellers, will be guest speaker in the next in this series of Harvard Law School forums.